Good morning. Welcome to The Human Author, Episode 8. My name is Jen Cantwell, otherwise known as JB Cantwell, and today I'm going to be working on the 5th book in my epic fantasy series called Light Chaser. The book is called The Warning. And as always, I will be reading for the first part of the live stream, the work that I did the day before. If you're new to this live stream, you can go back to the YouTube channel and start from the beginning. And you can always just tune in for the first 10 or 15 minutes when I'm reading if the dictation is too slow for you. Today, you will be hearing power tools and pounding noises, something I have no control over, but the only other option was to cancel, so I'm going to go ahead and continue. So I'm going to go ahead and read what I did yesterday. Here we go. How did you get here? I asked Brennan, but he seemed unwilling to speak, even to me. I looked over at Kenneth. Well, he shrugged. He just showed up one day. We don't know where he came from or who he is. You say his name is Brennan? I looked down at him again, wiping away his tears with my hands. That's right, I said. I knelt down and looked him in the face. I need you to tell me what happened to the others. Did he take them? His eyes grew wide, and he nodded. My stomach tightened at this news. I realized I probably shouldn't have eaten as much as I had. I'd gone weeks with little food, and combined with the stress I now felt, my stomach could barely tolerate it. Where? I asked. It'll be the dungeons, Kenneth said. Anyone with ties to magic ended up getting rounded up and put down beneath the city. But why? Surely they didn't all have magic themselves. Things have changed. Zahn insists on having total control over all magic in the city. It's much worse than when you left. When I had left 7 months earlier, magic had been outlawed then, too. But the lawmen didn't persecute people so much, as they eagerly forced magic out of unknown sorcerers and stole the light from those who were brave enough to bring it into the market. Something must have changed. Zahn must have changed. I looked around at the many people sitting by the fire, all of their attention on me and our conversation. How did you get out? I asked the crowd. No one spoke, and everyone looked at Kenneth. Well, it was too bad, he said. I had to escape my own family. You know my father. To say he's a rat is an understatement. I was very relieved when he didn't find you before you left the kingdom. There had been a bounty on my head for the days leading up to my final goodbye to Eagleview. It was 20 pieces of silver, and they wanted me brought in alive. I suppose he's been quite an informant, I said. Anyone else I should look out for? Kenneth and his easy smile seemed gone forever. This boy had been replaced and intense now as he led this group of refugees. Pretty much anyone, he said. He looked around at the crowd, at 3 people in particular. This is Graham. He helped me in the beginning, but he was injured on his way out of the city. The man Graham pulled up his pant leg, and I saw it was badly burned. Zahn? No, Graham said. One of his minions. So that's what they were calling them now, his students. This is Finley, Kenneth went on. This one didn't smile at all. Instead, she scowled at me as if I represented nothing more than danger to her. She's not exactly very trusting, he said, but she's useful in a bind. It was then that I realized she had been the one to tie my hands. Useful indeed. And this is Kearney, Kenneth said. He's the one who hunts for us. We'd all be dead without him. To this man, I nodded in thanks. The stew was amazing. You'll have to teach me how to set snares. I'd tried this once before, helped by the man I'd known for weeks, Malcolm, but that had been a long time ago. Finley stood up and approached me. I've heard about you, she said. With you here, surely we'll be found. And why is that? I asked. I would think you'd be relieved to have a sorceress on your team. Kenneth shook his head. As the months went by, Zahn figured out how to sense sorcery. True, it only really works when they were close by, but for those who hid, he had most unpleasant ending. Like my father? I looked down at Brennan. He looked back and forth between my face and the stew that still cooked atop the fire. Are you hungry? I looked up at Kenneth. I'm sure he is, he said, but he doesn't eat much. I remembered this from our trip through the wildlands. Brennan had been responsible for gathering plants for us to subsist on as we traveled through that desolate place. I wondered if he was doing the same thing now, only not telling anyone. Kearney, Kenneth said, can you get this boy? Brennan. He looked down at him, and Brennan shrunk back, holding my hand tightly. He slowly nodded. Nice to meet you, Kenneth went on. I'd like it if you would eat, especially since I know now that you're a friend of Bree's. Brennan looked out from behind my legs. Then his hunger seemed to get the better of him, and he sprinted over to the fire. The man tending the stove ladled him out a small serving. Brennan looked down at it as if it were the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. It's hot, the man said, echoing the command to me several minutes before. I can help with that, I said. I held out my hands for the bowl, but Brennan looked at it protectively. Brennan, it's me. I can help. I promise I won't eat it. Reluctantly, he held out the bowl. I placed my hands around it and set my intention, bringing cold to my fingers and transferring it to the bowl of hot stew. A few moments later, the steam abated, and I handed it back to him. He looked at me in awe, even though I knew he'd seen my mouth. Maybe it's been a while. Brennan found a tree stump to sit upon and began wolfing the stew down. I looked around at the many faces. So you're all afraid of me. I can help you, too. A different man, one whose name I didn't know, opened his mouth to argue. The only thing you'll help us with is getting our hiding place discovered, he said angrily, staring at Kenneth. You need to get her out of here before someone finds us. We need her, Kenneth said. She's the only one who has magic, and I'm willing to bet she can hide herself pretty well. The man laughed, a barking, irritated sound. It doesn't matter if she can hide, he said. She can't hide from him. From Zahn? I asked. There was another low rumble from the group, and the sound of it wasn't in my favor. I looked back up at Kenneth. Had he grown? I'll stay for the night, I said. I turned back to the group. I promise you I'll be on my way at first light. No, Kenneth said. He gripped onto my arm, turning me toward him. I'll let you go back there. You'll be found, and then he'll kill you. You know that's what will happen. And you know that I can beat him, I said. Maybe just him, but I doubt even your power is enough to stand against 15 or 20 sorcerers. I'm going home, I said stubbornly. A moment later, I felt Brennan's hand in mine once more. I looked down. You can't leave me here, he said in the tiniest voice. What had happened to the confident boy I'd known? You know I can't take you. You'll be safer here with these people. I looked up at Kenneth. They'll protect you. He shook his head, and new tears began to form in his eyes. Kenneth, tell him he'll be okay. I looked at him expectantly, but he just shook his own head. No one is safe anywhere now, he said. I stared at him, incredulous at his tone. Then I grabbed onto his arm and drew him away from the crowd, releasing Brennan's hand. That kind of attitude will get you nowhere, I hissed. Don't you know? There has to, or you don't stand a chance. The look in his eyes told me that if I said much more, he might start crying too. But then he shook his head a little, seeming to come back to himself, this new leader. We haven't had hope for quite some time, he said. But you're right. He looked out at the faces. I will come with you. I shook my head. That's crazy. If what you're saying is true, you'll be dead within an hour. And so will you. I couldn't deny this danger, but suddenly I felt protective over my old friend. I looked over at Brennan, realizing that he was standing only a few feet away, listening. I will go too, he said. He lifted his chin, a gesture I'd seen from him many times. I smiled sadly. You'll need to stay. His face fell, and he stepped backward until he was almost atop the fire. Kenneth caught my attention again with a squeeze of his hand. You and I will go alone. We will leave early. Together, maybe we'll be able to get somewhere. Isn't that a lovely sound out there? I'm sorry. As excited as I was to see my family, I knew that there was a distinct possibility that they were gone, lost. No, excitement wasn't the right emotion. I needed to steel myself for the very worst. I thought about the things that Torin did to people, the way he tortured them. I just hoped I wouldn't be too late. Kenneth showed me where to sleep, and I wrapped my traveling cloak around me as the fire went out. As I stared up through the trees at the stars beyond, I knew that sleep would elude me still. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep, for when I heard the twig snap this time, it jostled me awake. I looked around through the trees, but I didn't find pursuers. Instead, I found Kenneth with one finger up to his lips, indicating quiet. I listened. Just on the outskirts of the trees were hoofbeats, unmistakable. Men spoke, but not loudly enough for me to make out their words. I heard nothing but jumbled thoughts and the snorting sounds of the horses as they walked by. Finally, I hear them moving away. I turned to Kenneth and whispered, "They didn't find us. How come?" He was watching me carefully, then turned to look further through the trees. He stood up and walked quietly away, beckoning me to join him. "The lawmen don't have magic of their own," he whispered. "It's only when they come with one of Zahn's pupils that the danger is so great." I looked out through the thinning trees into the dark grassland that stretched between here and the wildlands. I could see the men, 6 of them horses, as they made their way away from us, patrolling the edges of the forest. "Do they do this every night?" I asked. "Not every night. I think we got lucky, but we've lost a few as the months have passed by. But none of them have spoken a word about where we are." "How do you know?" "They haven't found us now, have they?" I shrugged. "I guess not." I turned and went back to where my things lay on the forest floor. I picked up my pack and secured me. "I think we should get moving," I said, "before he wakes up." I pointed to where Brennan had fallen asleep. He had crawled up next to me, and while I felt terrible guilt at turning away from him, this was no war for children. Somewhere in the back of my mind, an image of Iona and the children of the Kaya forest, who'd fought their entire lives, came to me. I wondered what kind of life Brennan might have had if he'd come along with me on that journey. Those children are gone. They're Torrens now. I understood this, knew it was true, but I also knew that Brennan had skills more than any other child. He'd kept us alive along the outskirts of the wildlands after all. I turned back to Kenneth. "We should go now." "Are you sure? The boy might not be able to handle your disappearing." I nodded. "Can you be ready in 5 minutes?" "I can be ready in 3." He walked away from me, stopped briefly next to the place beside Brennan, and silently grabbing his own cloak and traveling pack. Ready, he walked up and stood beside me. "Do you know the way?" I asked. "I took a different direction last time. I don't know if it's the fastest." "Don't you get it?" he asked. "This isn't about speed. It's about survival." He was right, but as I was desperate to discover what had happened to my family, that called for speed. "Fine then, show me how to survive, and let's liberate those we can." Okay, that was all of... Yeah. And let me get going for today. All right. We headed out away from the group, and with one last glance back at them, I waited to see Brennan was still asleep, none the wiser, period. New line. Since we'd just been awakened by the group of lawmen, comma, we kept quiet and didn't speak again, period. The moon had risen and lit our way now, period. We walked this way in silence over an hour, comma, then finally stopped for a rest, period. New line. Open quote. Have you been back to Eagleview since you left? Question mark, close quote, I asked quietly, period. New line, open quote. Only once, comma, close quote, he said, period. Open quote. I visited my mother, comma, just to let her I was still alive, period. Close quote, new line, open quote. You went back to your family after all that? Question mark, close quote, new line. Open quote. I wanted to make sure she was okay, period. And I wanted her to know that I was, comma, too, period. Also, comma, she knew a little bit about my father, period. That's why I haven't been back since, period. Apparently, he has become close with Zahn, comma, willing to inform on anyone, comma, even friends and family, period. He's completely abandoned the fruit stand, comma, undo. Semicolon. Gets his money from Zahn now, comma. And he's probably living on the inside of the walls. City, comma, behind the walls, period. At least, comma, that was what my mother said, period, close quote, new line. This surprised me, period. I knew that Kenneth's father was generally speaking not to be, comma, but I hadn't imagined him capable of informing on his own family, period. Open quote. If they're inside the wall, comma, you'll never get access to them, period. Close quote. New line. My friend, comma, Oriana, comma, had lived close to the wall, comma, but not quite inside it. It had been difficult for me to get near her house, comma, more difficult still for me to help heal her, period. In the end, comma, her sickness had been too much for me to manage, period. I thought back to that day, comma, the day blood came to her lips during a coughing fit, period. New line. That was her last day, period. New line. I wondered what would had become of her family since then, period. Were they seen as being in the clear by people like Zahn or Kenneth's father? Question mark. I was willing to bet they'd been indicated, comma, too, period. If so, comma, it would have been my fault, comma, for I had used my untrained magic upon their daughter, comma, something they always hated, period. They wanted to follow the law desperately, comma, maybe hoping that if they did, comma, they would get inside the city, period. New line. Open quote. What's your plan now? Question mark, close quote, I asked, period. Open quote. Following me is dangerous, period, close quote, new line. Open quote. Your last time I checked, comma, close quote, he said, comma, smirking, period. New line. He had me there, period. Still, comma, the threat remained, period. New line. Open quote. Take me to the edge of the trees. That gets me close enough to the Cap Wild Cap lands, period. You can't come with me. Semicolon. It will mean you're dead, period. Close quote. New line. His smirk increased, period. Open quote. You're going to need someone to protect you, comma, even if it's just me and a club, period. Close quote. He held up a wooden club I hadn't noticed before, period. New line. Open quote. Is that your only weapon? Question mark. Close quote. New line. Open quote. It's been enough to get rid of more than one lawman, comma, close quote, he said, period. Open quote. There's something to be said for brute force, period, close quote. New line. I wondered where my old friend had gone, comma, the boy I'd left behind seemed to have been replaced by a man willing to protect those around him, period. It would be a good excuse for me to send him back to the group once we got close enough, period. New line. Open quote. You'd be a fool to follow me, period, close quote. New line. Oh, I know, comma, close quote, he said, period. Open quote. But the same could be said of me, period, close quote, new line. He leaned back against a tree, comma, then continued, period. Open quote. The lawmen don't have magic of their own, period. My people are safe enough, comma, as no one senses none of the lawman that have come by have been able to find anyone in the forest with magic, period, close quote, new line, open quote. But how do you know? Question mark. If no one is with you that holds magic, comma, how can you say that they would be found if they did? Question mark, close quote, new line. His smile faded, period, open quote. There was one at the beginning, period. A boy, comma, one of the kids from the trash heap, period. I didn't know his name, comma, but he had the ability to fires using nothing more than the light from his palms, period. He was the first one the lawmen found, comma, and luckily for him, We were there with our clubs, comma, no matter how archaic they may seem to you, period. After that, comma, he ran away, period. Maybe he understood the danger presence put us in, period. In any case, comma, we attacked the man chasing him, as well as the sorceress who accompanied him, period. Close quote, new line, open quote. You killed them both, question mark, close quote, new line. He didn't answer, comma, but I understood why, period. New line, open quote. Does Zahn still have that pool of cap light, question mark, close quote, I asked, comma, changing the subject, period, new line, open quote. It could be very useful to your people, comma, as you call them, period, close quote. New line, what are you doing, question mark. New line, open quote. I haven't the faintest, comma, close quote, Kenneth said, period, open quote. But I can tell you that the cap light, cap chasers have stopped all sales in the market, comma, and most of them have been arrested, period. Close quote, new line. This fact, comma, that the men I'd idolized during my childhood were probably dead, comma, brought anger to me where there had only been fear before, period. Suddenly, comma, I didn't care about the cap light, period. What I cared about was whether my father, comma, grandmother, comma, and Regan were still alive, period. The more I learned of their plight, comma, the less hopeful I became, period. New line, would there be nothing left? Question mark. New line, open quote. Why have you stayed so close to home? Question mark, close quote, I asked, period, open quote. Why not just move on? Question mark, close quote, new line. Kenneth shook his head, period. Open quote. Everyone who left, comma, all of us, comma, has our own reason to stay close by, period. Some have family, comma, like me, comma, and others have treasures they've left behind, period. Close quote, new line, open quote. What kinds of treasures? Question mark, close quote, new line, open quote. Well, comma. I lost my names. It's not on my computer. I have them, but I don't remember anybody's name. So I'm going to go ahead and just say name, and I end up in this situation. Name had a cache of gold, comma, I know that, period. But he's no fool, comma, undo, semicolon. He knew better enough to not bring it with him. period. We were able to escape in the dark of night, comma, but gold is heavy, comma, and our lives were on the line, period. Close quote. New line. The sun was beginning to rise out along the horizon, comma, and I was growing tired, period. Not to mention hungry again, period. New line. Open quote. We should stay here, comma, close, I said, period. Open quote. Can we rest? Question mark, close quote. New line. Kenneth looked out over the field. Grassy fields, comma, and then relented, period. Open quote. Not for long, comma, close quote, he said, period. Open quote. Let's give it an hour, period. Semicolon. Then we can move on again, period. Close quote. New line. I laid back, comma, leaning my head against my pack for a pillow, period. Now, comma, I was nearly as tired as I had been before that dinner the night before, period. I closed my eyes, comma, thinking about the trials that lay ahead, period. New line, no more cap light, period. New line. It was true, semicolon, period. No. If it was true, comma, and Zahn had no more light, comma, then my decisions would be made for me, period. But as I thought about my father, comma, about how his life had been ruined his trade as a chaser, comma, I knew that I had to stop, period. New line. There's no place for this anymore, period. New line. So, comma, I turned over onto my side and resolved to stop seeking it out entirely, period. Maybe in battle, things might change, comma. But this wasn't a battle we were about to walk into, period. It was something different, period. Comma. And I knew that in the end, comma, it would be me against Zahn, period. New line. If anyone else still stood to fight, comma, I supposed that Kenneth's people would take care of that battle, period. New line. But me, comma, more and more I learned about Zahn, comma. 4. the more desperate I was to find him and make him pay for everything he'd done, comma, whether it was under Torin's watch or not, period. New line. Page break, period. Isn't that a lovely sound? I love hearing that at 9:30 in the morning. Makes me feel so good. I woke up to Kenneth shaking my shoulder, period. Had it already been an hour, question mark. I turned a comma, this time knowing that silence would be required, period. He was looking out into the trees, comma, alarm on his face, period. New line, open quote. Is it them? Question mark, close quote, I asked quietly, period. Open quote. Did they find us? Question mark. New line. Close quote. New line. Because of me? Question mark. New line. Carefully, comma, we stood, comma, grabbing our packs and getting ready to flee, period. New line, open quote. We'll have to be as quiet as we can be, comma, close quote, Kenneth said, period. Open quote. Luckily, comma, their horses make more noise than humans do. Period. Come on, let's go. Period. Close quote. New line. We took off, quickly winding our way through the trees, comma, and I kept my eyes on the valley beyond, comma, searching for the threat, period. New line. Then, comma, when Kenneth indicated we should stop again to listen, comma, we crouched down low together to search for our pursuer, period. New line. Sure enough, comma, 3 horses and 3 lawmen were headed in our direction, period. I'd frequently wished that I'd learn how to hide myself magically, period. But that was a trait that few sorcerers had, semicolon. At least I'd never seen it, period. Comma. Myself, period. New line. As we sat there quietly, comma, ready to run, comma, I heard something, not in the field, but in the trees, period. I turned around, comma, scanning the woods, period. And then I found him, period, new line. Brennan, period, new line. I moved to stand up, comma, but Kenneth grabbed my hand and pulled me back down, period. New line. I had to settle for turning my head and making a I say the word slash, it brings up all kinds of messed grammar. Across my neck, period. He understood and crouched down himself, period. New line. For a moment, comma, I thought we were in the clear, period. But then, comma, far in the distance, comma, I saw another ride, period. New line. And this one, comma, I thought I knew, period. New line. What seemed like ages ago now, comma, I'd known this girl, period. She had been one of Zahn's pupils, comma, running with Aaron and her followers, period. They must have broken apart before Aaron fled the kingdom, period. I didn't know how strong her power was now, comma. But if what Kenneth was saying was true, we were in big trouble, period. New line, open quote. We have to get back through the trees, comma, close quote. I whispered, period, open quote. I know her, period, close quote, new line. Kenneth didn't require telling twice, period. We both stood and turned away from the field, comma, running as fast as we could, comma, as quietly as we could, comma, deeper into the forest, period. As we passed him by, comma, I grabbed Brennan's hand and pulled him after us, period. He gave a little yelp, comma, and I turned back to shush him, period. New line. It was then that I saw name coming after us, period. Zahn must have taught her and the others his talent for searching, period. Tracking, period. I'd known other trackers, comma, had been taken by them in the wild Caplands, period. Perhaps Zahn hadn't taught her, comma, himself, comma, and had just left her to the desert to learn on her own, period. New line. Well, comma, she had learned, comma, all right, period. New line. She was getting closer now, comma, and though I could see her horse clearly, comma, the three of us each hid behind a tree, comma, waiting quietly, period. New line. Just as she was about to pass on, just as I was about to throw a curse in her direction, comma, I was surprised when Kenneth jumped out from behind his tree and hit her in the shoulder with his club, period. New line. She fell from the horse, comma, yelping in pain, period. New line. But whether that was real or not, comma, I wasn't sure, period. Sorcerers had the ability to cloak themselves in a safety. I've always called this a bubble, which just doesn't sound right. But I'll try to think of something else. A cloak of safety, comma, a hard shell to protect them and their abilities, period. New line, I wondered if she had been protected just now, period. New line. I made a move in her direction, comma, lighting my hands with fire, comma. Kenneth beat me to her, period. Comma. His club raised, period. New line. Then, comma, her voice, period. Open quote. Don't, exclamation point, close quote. She said, comma, her tone begging, period. Begging, period. Open quote. I came here to warn you, period, close quote, new line. I walked up to her and stood over her, comma, tossing the fire back and forth between my two palms, period. New line. Kenneth put his boot upon her chest, period, open quote. One move, comma, close quote, he said, period, open line. Open quote. And I'll smash you flat, period, close quote. But she just turned to me, comma, and it became obvious that she had no such protection as I'd feared, period. She clutched onto her shoulder, comma, but it wasn't enough to keep her from speaking, period. Open quote. He's coming, comma, close quote, she said, period, open quote. He knows you're here, period, close quote, new line, open quote. I shook my head, period, open quote. How, question mark, close quote, new line, open quote. The lawmen from last night, period. They figured it out, period, close quote, new line. But this didn't add up, period. If the lawmen had found my hiding place, comma, why hadn't they done anything about it, question mark. New line, open quote. I don't think that's true, comma, close quote, I said, comma, approaching her, period. I stopped with my boot next to her head, period. She looked at me sideways, comma, desperation growing on her face, period. New line, open quote. It is, comma, I swear, comma, close quote, she said, period. New line, open quote. If you know so much, comma, tell me where my family is, comma, close quote, I said, period. New line. Open quote. Are they still alive? Question mark, close quote, new line. She shrugged, comma, then yelped at the pain in her shoulder again, period. Open quote. I don't know, period. They're down beneath the city, comma, but many of them have died. The people down there, period. Zahn doesn't let us get too close, period. Close quote. New line. Open quote. You're lying, comma, close quote, I said, period. Kenneth said, period. Open quote. You know exactly who's down there, period, close quote. New line. She looked at me, comma, her eyes pleading, period. But just as I thought she was going to start again, comma, she lit her own hands with fire and got ready to throw a jolt of it in my direction, period. New line. She was too slow, and I hit her first, period. Comma, directly in the chest this time, period. It killed her instantly, comma. Her eyes wide open with shock, period. New line. Kenneth took a couple of steps back and stared at me in disbelief, period. Open quote. Why did you do that? Question mark, close quote. New line. Could have found out more, period, close quote. New line. Open quote. Did you not see? Question mark. She was about to attack us and M dash. Close quote. Close quote. Cap that. Matter. Comma, close quote. He retorted, period, open quote. She would have reported back to him, comma, that's true, comma. But it's not very often we have someone under our control, comma, someone on the inside, period. This was wasteful, period, close quote. He kicked her in the side, comma, clearly angry, period. But she was beyond now, comma, unable to feel, period. New line, open quote. Suddenly, comma, I felt that familiar feeling of shame again, period. It crept up my neck and made my cheeks hot, period. Had it been a mistake? Question mark. Had I become a monster? Question mark. New line. Open quote. I didn't know what else to do, period. She was ready to attack, period. Didn't you notice? ? Close quote. New line. Open quote. He looked like he wanted to scream at me, comma, but he spoke in a quiet voice, period. Open quote. I noticed. Semicolon. Do I look like a total idiot? ? You need to learn how to hold back, period. Close quote. New line. Was this guy, comma, this kid, comma, chastising me for saving his life? ? New line. But then I thought maybe he was right, period. Maybe I was always too fast, comma, always jumping ahead and right into the fight, period. New line. I felt something on my fingers, comma, then turned in a flash, comma, ready to do that very thing again, period. Line. But it was only Brennan grabbing my hand, period. New line, open quote. You scared me, comma, close quote, I said angrily, period. Open quote. Don't sneak up on me like that, period, close quote, new line, open quote. That's what I'm talking about, comma, close quote, Kenneth said, period. Open quote. If you can't handle on yourself, comma, we will surely lose, period, close quote, new line, open quote. And what exactly do we stand to lose, ? What is this fight for, ? Close quote, new line. He crossed his arms and looked down at me, period. Open quote. It's the fight for the city, semicolon, comma, or at least what remains of it, period, close quote, new line. His words made me think of crumbling walls and out of control sorcery, period. I wondered how many others were down in the dungeons, comma, too, period. The thought made my stomach turn upside down, comma. As I realized his intention, period. New line, open quote. If you intend to take back the city, comma, it's going to take more than just you and me, period. Close quote, new line, open quote. And if you intend to go back to your home, comma, to need me and my club, period. You and I can figure out what to do when we get closer, comma. But until then, comma, keep your hands to yourself, period. All right. That's what I got for today. Thank you for joining me. Sorry about the power tools. And we will do more of this tomorrow. If you were not able to hold dictation, remember you can come for the first 10 or 15 minutes to hear what I did the day before. Thank you for joining me. If you have any questions or comments, send them to Jen, Jen, @thehumanauthor.com. That's it. Have a great